John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic president. Not only that, but he was the youngest president ever elected. I've created this project to ask the questions, what was his life like, and what factors led to him becoming the first Catholic president in U.S. history at 43 years old. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on May 29, 1917. He was the second child of Joe and Rose Kennedy. He suffered many ailments as a child, including the scarlet fever in February of 1920. It had afflicted many children in his hometown of Boston and even forced the temporary shutdown of several schools. John's mother had become worried that the fever would spread to her other children, Joe, Rosemary, and Kathleen. John was quarantined in the Boston City Hospital. After weeks, the illness finally subsided. His father Joe had promised that if John got better, he would donate half of his current wealth to charity. A check for $3,750, or $45,000 in today's money, was written for an organization of Catholic dentists who provided care for children in Catholic schools. This fulfilled Joe Sr.'s promise. John was not the best student as a young boy. In his mother's words, he had a lack of fight to succeed in his subjects. He showed strong social skills, easily making friends and winning over girls. At 13 years old, John entered 8th grade at Canterbury, a boys' boarding school in New Milford, Connecticut. John wrote in a letter home early in the year that he was initially homesick, but didn't dislike the school. He requested a subscription to Literary Digest from his father, but also received poor marks in Latin due to his lack of effort. He wrote to his father saying that he may not have a good memory for personal items, but was able to remember entire stories perfectly for quizzes in his English class. Obviously, he had the ability to succeed, but not the effort. When it was time for high school, John attended the same boarding school as his older brother, Joe Jr., Choate, in Wallingford, Connecticut. That year, he took an IQ test and scored 119. This score placed him in the top 20% of Choate students, which was already a prestigious group. This test proved his intellectual ability beyond the amount of effort he had showed. After several years with slight improvements in grades, John attended Princeton. After missing school for sickness and a summer off, John decided to transfer from Princeton to Harvard and planned to try out for football. His primary fields of study were government, history, and literature. Receiving mostly C's, his professors rarely took notice of him beyond his positive demeanor. John and Joe were tutored by the same professor, Dr. Payson Wild, who recalled John as a genuine intellect. Fast forward to 1940. John F. Kennedy begins work on his thesis. Obviously, 1940 was also the height of World War II. Being a fan and student of political science, John chose to write his thesis about the Munich Agreement. This was a piece of appeasement at the beginning of World War II. The League of Nations, including England, allowed Germany to annex new land and expand their empire during the rise of the Nazis. John's thesis, in short, concluded that this event was not an error in terms of incompetency by political leaders, but rather a result of many smaller variables. What was interesting is that he never blamed any person for allowing Germany's initial expanse. Professor Henry Yeomans judged this theory magna cum laude, or with great distinction. He said it was badly written, but a laborious, interesting, and intelligent discussion of a difficult question. Another professor rated it cum laude, with distinction. Often and by all judges, he was complimented in picking such a current, relevant, and competent topic. He initially believed that America should avoid joining another European war. However, after Harvard's newspaper, The Crimson, printed a neutralist-sided article stating America should stay out of the war, John responded with a letter. This letter was printed in The Crimson. It surveyed the reason England was unprepared for the war in lacking their armament building, and how America should learn a lesson from this. John's father initially thought his brother Joe would be the one to go into politics. Eventually, Joe Sr. realized John was the one for the job. John and Joe Sr. plotted his congressional race for some time. They gathered many colleagues to assist John in different capacities. They made the executive decisions, but it was Mark Dalton, the campaign manager, who ran the day-to-day. He coordinated appearances, speeches, and strategy. Slowly, more and more people became eager to join this team. John was a young, prideful figure. He was fair and motivated the people around him. On November 5, 1946, John was elected to the House of Representatives. He beat Republican Lester A. Bowen, receiving almost 3 times the votes of his competitor. Some questioned if his father was controlling more than the money, but he showed that he was no puppet. He guided his team and strung together a successful campaign. After 3 consecutive terms in the House of Representatives, John ran for the office of Massachusetts Senator. By 1952, he had proven he was easily able to stand alone in an office and showed great promise on the political battlefield. John started a mission: visit every city and town, all 351, in Massachusetts. This took nearly 4 years and laid the groundwork for his race for senator. This was no easy task, considering he needed to win his House seat back in 1948 and 1950. He developed a no town too small attitude. After speaking with Archbishop Richard Cushing to see if announcing his running in the campaign during a Holy Week would be okay, the candidacy became official. On Election Day, Kennedy won with 51.5% of the votes, a much closer margin than his first race. Now that we have covered the years of his life before the presidency, it is time to look at how he won the 1960 presidential election. John F. Kennedy's opponent was Richard Nixon, who later became the 37th president. One of the reasons Kennedy won was actually because he was Catholic. Republican Catholics who would have voted for Nixon crossed over to elect a Catholic. Not only did he get Catholic Republicans, he got the majority of Catholic Republicans. Only 22% of Catholic Republicans voted for Nixon, the least in recent history for a Republican candidate. This is not to say Nixon ignored the Catholics. He was simply unable to sway them from a candidate of their own faith. One of the biggest factors leading to Kennedy's win was the debates between him and Richard Nixon. During the 50s, 70% of American homes acquired television sets, reaching the total number of homes with access to TV to over 80%. An estimated 70 million Americans, or about 2/3 of the electorate, watched the first debate on September 26th. The key reason that the first debate helped Kennedy was not actually the discussion itself. Kennedy was much more prepared for the debate being on television. He prepared for it beyond preparing to answer questions. He went to the set the day before the debate to plan his outfit. He wore a blue suit, so his color would pop next to the gray background. Nixon wore a gray suit and blended in. When answering the questions and speaking, he did not speak to Nixon. He spoke to camera, and in turn, the American public. This debate changed American politics. Debates became incredibly important and still have so much to do with performance rather than issues and answers. It was later studied that most TV viewers believed Kennedy won the debate, while most radio listeners sided with Nixon. This proves that the image JFK worked so hard to achieve was worth the effort. The last factor leading to Kennedy's win was his surge of votes from the African American population. These votes helped him clinch several key states. This happened because of a very key series of events involving the family of Martin Luther King Jr. When MLK was arrested for a civil rights protest, Kennedy called his wife. JFK offered assistance in the release of Martin Luther King Jr. That call, although against the advice of many Kennedy staff members, caused MLK Sr. to endorse JFK. These three factors were vital in the election of America's first Catholic president. It had not been announced formally that he would run for a second term when his tour of states began, but plans were developing behind closed doors. He visited and spoke in many Western states to discuss issues and prepare to hopefully be reelected. On November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy and his wife Jackie were riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas. During this ride, JFK was shot in the neck and head. He was rushed to a hospital, but there was nothing to be done. A Catholic priest delivered him his last rites. The first Catholic president received the last Catholic sacrament. This project has taken a look at the life and election of America's first Catholic president, John F. Kennedy. He was a poor student but a bright young man. He was a fierce and intelligent candidate. The factors leading to his win in 1960 were the Catholic voters, the African American voters, and his appearance during the debate against Richard Nixon.